It began as a quiet morning along Japan's northeastern coast, March 11, 2011. The sea was calm, a thin layer of mist floating over the fields of Miyagi and Iwate. Fishermen prepared their boats. School children walked under pale spring sunlight. In Sendai, people glanced at their watches, rushing to trains and offices. No one noticed the deep rumble echoing far beneath the Pacific. A whisper of movement 24 kilometers below the surface, where the Earth's crust was locking, straining, waiting to break. And then, at 2:46 p.m., time itself seemed to shatter. Buildings began to sway. Roads rippled like waves. Windows exploded, alarms screamed, and the ground rolled in violent, impossible motion, lasting not seconds, but endless minutes. People clung to walls, crying out. Far out at sea, the ocean recoiled. Then began its deadly return. The day Japan would never forget had begun. But no one could imagine what came next, when Earth trembled. If stories like this fascinate you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It keeps history alive. Before that fateful afternoon, life in northeastern Japan flowed in harmony with the sea. Fishing towns dotted the coastline, their harbors filled with wooden boats and the smell of salt and diesel. Rice fields stretched inland, still damp from melting winter snow. Families lived simple, steady lives, shaped by discipline, community, and a quiet respect for nature. In Tokyo, 230 miles to the south, trains ran precisely on time. The economy was steady, technology advanced, and confidence strong. For many, Japan seemed indestructible, a nation built on resilience, precision, and preparation. But beneath the Pacific, an invisible fault line had been gathering strain for centuries. The Japan Trench, where the Pacific Plate dives beneath the North American Plate, is one of Earth's most powerful tectonic boundaries, a place of silent tension and unimaginable force. For decades, scientists had warned of the big one, a megaquake that could reshape Japan's coast. Tsunami walls were built, evacuation drills practiced, but no plan could truly prepare for what was coming. The morning of March 11th began like any other. Calm skies, a chill breeze, and the hum of daily life across towns like Sendai, Ishinomaki, and Fukushima. Yet deep below, the planet's forces were aligning for the single largest tremor in Japan's modern history. At 2:46 p.m., the first jolt struck, sudden, sharp, and unfamiliar even to a nation accustomed to earthquakes. In Tokyo, skyscrapers began to sway like tall trees. Chandeliers trembled in ancient temples. Alarms echoed across the city, but few realized that this was only the beginning. Within seconds, the shaking intensified. In the coastal city of Sendai, people dropped to the ground as walls cracked and shelves collapsed. Power poles whipped from side to side, cars bounced on the asphalt, and the earth itself undulated as if alive. Across the northeast, cameras captured surreal images. Highways bending, bridges trembling, office towers twisting against the skyline. In homes, families screamed as furniture toppled and ceilings gave way. The quake lasted nearly 6 full minutes, an eternity of chaos and disbelief. Then, silence. But beneath the ocean, the earth was still moving. The quake had ripped open a 500-kilometer fault line, forcing the seafloor upward by several meters and displacing billions of tons of water. In the deep Pacific, sensors began to register something catastrophic. A massive wave, traveling faster than a jetliner, heading straight for Japan's coast. 30 minutes later, the first tsunami sirens began to wail. "Tsunami Keiho! Tsunami warning!" echoed through loudspeakers and cell phones. Along the coast, people ran toward higher ground, but for many, there simply wasn't enough time. At 3:27 p.m., the ocean arrived. A wall of black water, nearly 40 meters high in some places, engulfed the shoreline with terrifying force. Entire towns vanished beneath the surge. Cars, houses, fishing boats, and debris swirled together in a churning flood of mud and fire. In Kesenuma, fuel depots exploded, sending columns of flame rising from the water. In Ishinomaki, residents watched in horror as the tide swept away schools, hospitals, and entire neighborhoods. Those who had climbed to rooftops clung to antennas and chimneys, praying the water would stop. But the waves kept coming, one after another, each carrying the remnants of homes, families, and lives once whole. Even concrete tsunami walls were no match. The ocean simply leapt over them. Farther south, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant lost power. Generators flooded. Cooling systems failed. Within hours, the facility was on the brink of meltdown, a second invisible disaster now unfolding within the same day. By evening, Japan was plunged into darkness. Coastal cities lay silent, burning, or gone. Communication networks failed, trains stopped, and millions were stranded. People wandered through rubble in freezing twilight, calling out for loved ones who would never answer. A day that began in peace had turned into one of the darkest in Japan's history. A moment when land, sea, and human fragility collided in merciless harmony. The world had just witnessed the fourth most powerful earthquake ever recorded, and one of the deadliest tsunamis of the modern age. When dawn broke on March 12th, Japan's northeast no longer looked like Earth. Where once stood fishing towns and rice fields, now stretched endless plains of debris. Twisted metal, shattered homes, and ships stranded miles inland. The ocean had redrawn the coastline. Entire villages were erased from the map. Helicopters hovered over blackened waters, searching for survivors clinging to rooftops and floating wreckage. On the ground, silence ruled, broken only by wind and the faint cries of those still trapped beneath collapsed houses. Cold rain fell through clouds heavy with ash and salt. The air smelled of mud, gasoline, and loss. Families wandered the ruins, calling out names that no one answered. At evacuation centers, thousands huddled in gymnasiums without heat or light. Blankets were scarce, food and water limited. The elderly sat motionless beside photos of those who were gone. And in the distance, a new terror rose: Fukushima. Without cooling systems, the nuclear plant's reactors overheated, spewing radioactive steam into the air. Explosions rocked the facility, turning a natural disaster into a nuclear emergency. Over 470,000 people were evacuated in total. A mass exodus through shattered roads and snow-covered fields. Japan's Prime Minister declared it the nation's worst crisis since World War II. For days, the television showed an endless loop: waves swallowing cities, fires burning on water, and people staring into nothing. The world watched in stunned silence. A nation built on precision, brought to its knees by the unpredictable force of nature. Yet even in ruin, something unbroken remained. Neighbors rescuing strangers, volunteers forming human chains, and a quiet strength rising from the mud and grief. Japan had been shaken, drowned, and scarred, but it was not defeated. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami changed Japan and the world forever. It was not just a moment of destruction, but a revelation of how fragile even the most advanced societies can be when nature reclaims its power. More than 15,000 lives were lost, 2,500 people remain missing, and over 450,000 were displaced. Entire communities vanished, their histories erased in a single afternoon. Japan's economy suffered billions in damage, and its energy system was thrust into crisis. At Fukushima Daiichi, 3 nuclear reactors melted down, releasing radioactive material into the air and sea. The disaster forced the evacuation of entire towns and changed global attitudes toward nuclear energy. Germany, among others, announced plans to phase out nuclear power completely, a decision born not from policy, but from the haunting images of Fukushima's smoke. For Japan, recovery became a test of spirit. Thousands of volunteers poured into the region, rebuilding schools, homes, and shrines, stone by stone. Scientists and engineers studied the event for years, improving tsunami warning systems, redesigning coastal defenses, and creating stronger building standards to withstand future quakes. But beyond the science, something deeper shifted. A collective understanding of impermanence. In a culture that already honored the fleeting nature of beauty, the disaster became a mirror of human vulnerability and resilience. Filmmakers, writers, and survivors began documenting the stories. Teachers who saved students by running uphill, families reunited after days adrift at sea, and those who chose to stay behind to warn others. These quiet acts of courage became symbols of Kizuna, a Japanese word meaning bond, the invisible thread of unity that holds people together in crisis. The world, too, responded with compassion. Rescue teams from dozens of countries arrived within hours. Aid poured in from across the globe, a rare moment when humanity set aside differences to help those standing in the ruins. In the years that followed, the scars of Tohoku slowly began to heal. The land rebuilt, the sea calmed, but the memories remained carved into the collective heart of Japan. A reminder that progress can crumble in seconds, and that every sunrise is a fragile gift. In the years since that fateful day, the people of Japan have rebuilt more than cities. They have rebuilt trust in the rhythm of life itself. The waves that once brought destruction now lap quietly against newly raised sea walls. Cherry blossoms bloom again over the same soil that once carried wreckage to the sea, and yet, beneath the calm, memory remains, not as a wound, but as a whisper. Remember. Remember the tremors that bent steel and tested spirit. Remember the light of lanterns that guided survivors through the dark. Remember how fragile the world can be, and how strong the human heart must become. When earth trembled, Japan fell to its knees, but from the silence it rose again, stronger, wiser, and more united than before. Because in every tragedy lies a lesson, that even when the world shakes twice, humanity's hope will always rise a third time. If you believe these stories should never be forgotten, subscribe and keep history alive. When Earth Trembled.